I thought I would just check in with everyone at the beginning before we jump into our exercise and when we finish. How are we doing? Like where are we at? Yes, it is my favorite question. Just kind of how are we feeling about what we've just journeyed through, both the content and the experience of moving through it together. Love to just take a few minutes and just kind of check in. It's kind of where are we at, both with things that we're noticing, but also like how are we experiencing it? For some of us, it's exhausting. For some of us, it's exciting. For some of us, it's a whole number of things. So I just love to give a minute for a few of us, just kind of check in. Where are we at? How we doing? So far, so good. Yeah. Yes. Well, I think as the handout that you have, it demonstrates we're not going to get through so much of that, and we're just going to kind of scratch the surface at enough. And it's this ongoing journey that I have never yet found anyone who I'm like they have perfected relationship. That is just an invitation. We just keep trying to be brave, and we keep learning, and we keep growing together. And so there's some moments where my hope today with the experience and the content is that it opens our imaginations a little bit wider to both what it can look like and also to the risk that is there and to kind of the whole picture. I have no expectations that we're going to come out of this going, got it. Maybe come out going like, oh, I don't have it as much as I thought I did, or, oh, I got some action steps, like, oh, these are some things that I want to implement. But yeah, that 32 flavors makes a ton of sense. A little of this, a little of that. I'm going, oh, there's a bunch of flavors. Yeah, that's what my dad says about emotions. There's more than two? Chocolate and vanilla. That's all he's got. I'm like, okay, well, we start with what we got. But also, man, there's a lot of great ice cream. Yeah, and I'm in Kansas City where we have Betty Ray's, and we got some really awesome, creative ice cream flavors. I don't know if you need barbecue. I don't know if the world needs barbecue ice cream, but it's there. It exists. Yeah. But also, that's how we feel about some of our feelings. Like, I don't really know if I need that feeling. Like, I'd probably be okay if I never felt that feeling again. But also, it's there. So, might as well name it. Yeah, where else are we? Where are we at? What are we feeling? Thank you. And that is to even because that is a place where you're at, right? Of going, oh, I am in a place where I'm not sure exactly where it is, and there's some journeying to do. And one of the frameworks that I think often about is actually the framework of honesty. And when I think about what it means to be honest, I actually put it in, I have tiers. And we use this language of honest, more honest, and most honest. And we can operate in relationships and go on a journey in tiers of honesty. Because just in actually this quadrant exercise is, for a lot of it, is just a practice of honesty. Let's just get in the story. Here's the emotion. I don't need to give you all of the paragraphs. I don't need to tell the whole story. We're just going to sit up going, I feel this about this. There's an honest statement. And in a lot of the places in our lives, that's probably where we want to sit. That until people have demonstrated the trustworthiness to move into a more honest, which is the paragraph. I feel this about this because here's what's going on. Here's a little bit of the story. Here's a framework. That'll be more honest. Most honest would be feel this about this because this is what happened and this is its impact on my life and where I am and here's the whole thing. That would be the most honest space. I would actually say very few people earn the right to get to that most honest space. Like wisdom would say we probably need some experience with people before we entrust them with our most honest place. What we tend to do at times is because the most honest feels overwhelming and scary, we actually don't even get into the honest spectrum. That we tell a different story. Or like, oh, instead of saying I feel sad to be away from my kids, instead of telling that at all, And there's a whole bunch of reasons. There's a whole bunch of stories and experiences and where my daughters are in the progression of their life and what last night looked like and what this next week is looking like with the dynamic within the, like there's a whole lot more that if I were to go down that tier, we would go more honest and most honest. But even just to say that and to get into the honest space, like there are things that I'm seeing that I don't know what to do with is honest, right? We could go further down. But a lot of times in community, we don't even get honest and we just tell a different story. And the difficulty with telling a different story is in order to then be held in places of more honesty or even most honesty, we actually then have to undo the story we've told and get back over into the honest story. So if I've been telling a story that actually is like, life is just purely wonderful, and I'm excited, which are partially true parts of the story, but there's these honest places that I'm not sharing, and I've just been engaging with these other stories, then it builds, and now I catch people by surprise. They're like, we really thought you were good. We thought you were good the whole time. And I'm sitting going, oh yeah, I've been holding the story that I just wasn't telling the whole time. And so now it causes other people to have to adjust, have to adapt. It catches people by surprise. And I don't know about you, but my facial expressions and my body language when I'm caught off guard are not the same as when I kind of know what I'm walking into. And relationally, this happens a lot, where we're walking with people and we think we know the story they're in, and then out comes the other story, maybe not told super well or a bit clunky, and we're caught off guard, and now they're watching us react to their story and thinking, oh, see, this is why I don't tell stories, when actually I want to be receptive. I just wasn't prepared to be receptive. And now we have a whole thing in relationship. And so the invitation, we don't have to go more honest than most honest with everyone. But the invitation, if we're operating in the story and in all of the stories, and we can be honest and we can name them and we can put the headers on, then as we're walking with people and we find ourselves needing to be held more deeply, we don't have to change the story. We can just deepen the story. Does that make sense? Right, so that's part of the invitation. So for a lot of us, and even as we go through these exercises, we may go through the quadrants and go like, okay, I'm not actually feeling held. Right, even though we might do some reflective listening, we're going to do this. And that likely may be true because the longing to be held may not be at the honest level. You may have a longing to be held more honestly or most honestly. We may not be there, and today we probably aren't going to have room to go all the way, nor would I necessarily try to take a room of this size into more honest and most honest. Like, I haven't earned the right to know those stories with you, nor have we probably all earned the trust needed to hold all of those stories for everyone. So we're going to sit. The goal is to get us into that category, into the honest space. And then our journey forward in practicing bravery is, okay, who are the people that I can take the risks with, that I can be brave with, that we can now deepen the story, that I can tell them more. So the quadrants, every item on your quadrant has stories behind it. So this would be part of the ways of thinking. Who gets to know those stories? Who holds not just where you are, but actually the story that goes into you being where you are, because you hold it. Right? You put that title, you put that category in that story, whether it's named, whether it's written, whether it's spoken or not, your body's still carrying it. You're still holding it. Does that make sense? Okay. So a couple more just kind of comments about where we're at, how we're doing, what we're feeling. Other than food comas? Mm-hmm. You say unknown territory and you're not used to being in this position? Yeah? Yeah? Oh. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Any other, just, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So this is one of the reasons, one of the things that my organization does is we run what we call slow communities. And so we run them for pastors. We call them pastoral care groups. We run those for disciple makers and people engaging. We call them slow communities that orient. I brought some journals in the back that orient around the practices I think I introduced you guys last year of survey, lament, own, and welcome. And the reason we create these are monthly groups, and we can do this with churches. It doesn't need to be through us. But what I find significant about slow communities is it's once a month for 90 minutes where it is the intent to practice honesty. That it isn't, because I think this, like, to your point, we are in practice, which means it's not fluid, it's not intuitive, it's not natural, it feels clunky, and our brains prefer the familiar every single time. And so the amount of effort it takes to get our brains to do something different, and usually if we're trying to get our brains to do something different, our brain is going, this isn't what we do, this is dangerous is bad, stop doing it. And so it really is hard to get ourselves to engage in different things. And so creating some spaces where the point is just to practice. We just get together, we go, we don't got to do it well. And so in our slow communities, we survey, which is this kind of question I'm asking now, like, where are we at? It's kind of, what are we holding? Where are we at? The L is for lament and going, what am I carrying? What's heavy? What am I wrestling with? Right? What are the threads getting pulled? The O is for owning. How's it impacting me? How's it changing how I'm noticing where I am and what I'm holding, and I'm finding I'm stepping back a little bit and pulling away, or I'm trying to get control of it, or I'm getting frustrated. We're kind of noticing, how's this stuff impacting me? And then the W is for welcome, and what's the invitation of God, and where is God taking us? And so in our slow communities, we just get together once a month and just to practice, just to see where it goes, because left to ourselves, without intention and without a specific place, most of us probably won't practice. All right, we may leave here and go, okay, cool, let's try to practice this. But most of us aren't going to show up tonight and go, hey, let's practice this, like, because it's not necessarily the context for it. Or we may be out hanging out with friends, and it's kind of weird if you're at your kid's soccer game to go like, hey, can we do an emotional check-in in this place? And like, context matters, the location matters, the rhythms of our life matter. So I think I would just encourage you to be thoughtful, as there are some things that you are being exposed to, the recognition that to actually allow the growth and the transformation is going to take practice. And so what do those spaces look like? Who do you want to do that with? If you have some people in mind that you want to do that with, how do you get intentional about it? How do you set up a time where you're getting together? Pick up a journal, do a small group that just does the journal together. That kind of thing. We don't have to make it kind of big. It doesn't have to be a lot of things. But just to create some spaces to go like, okay, I really want to practice being brave. Will you practice being brave with me? How do we engage this way? So I just want to encourage you, because for a lot of us, we haven't necessarily been, it's not that we've never done this, because I think if probably most of our deepest meaningful relationships, we are doing much of this. What this is about is, can we do it intentionally and on purpose and in recreatable ways, so that when we make new relationships, we actually know what it is like to deepen them, as opposed to having some that are deep and some that are not, and we just kind of don't know why they are that way. So we just roll with the deep ones and we keep things shallow, and because that doesn't allow us as the body of Christ to deepen our journey together into the fullness of the kingdom. That requires us to know, how do we do it so we can teach others and invite others to do it. Does that make sense? Yeah, so I don't assume, so please don't hear like, oh, he's up here thinking none of us do any of this. Actually, I think a lot of us do a lot of this. We may not know that we're doing it or know how to recreate it or be intentional about it, and that to me is really the point of the practice and the skills. Yeah, you wouldn't have me here if y'all weren't doing any of this stuff. So there's some familiarity. Okay. Well, I would like us to go return back to that quadrant space and actually practice with one another. And so buddy up or get back into your triads. And we're going to do together what we watched Pastor David and Michelle do up here. And so we're going to take turns, so everyone will get a chance to do all of it. And so we're going to have that first person that is just going to turn to the person who's listening and share, I feel blank about blank. And then the person who's listening is going to say, I hear that you are saying you feel blank about blank. And then what's the question we ask? Did I get you? So everyone say that question. Did I get you? Right? And part of what I want us to be paying attention to isn't just the words we're using, but our body language too. When someone's saying something sad, are we smiling as we're reflecting back? This is something we do a lot. People don't even realize how much someone's telling us something sad, or we're telling someone something sad, and actually because we don't want to feel sad, we put a smile on our face while we talk about the sad thing. Because somehow if I smile and talk about sad, we balance it out. except we actually end up missing each other, and we're going, and it's actually confusing to hear someone tell a sad story but see them smiling. And we're like, are you sad about this? Is this as risky? But we do that to mitigate our own risk and to balance it out. So this is all stuff we're just going to be paying attention to. So we're gonna take a few minutes. You can pick a quadrant. You can share from a few quadrants. I don't really care what you share from your quadrant or if it's things that aren't on your worksheet. What I care about is we actually take the chance to practice, and to practice allowing others to hold us, which for some of us we need lots of practice in, and practice allowing ourselves to hold others, which some of us need a lot of practice in. So, you guys ready for this? Okay, so we'll take a few minutes. I'll check in with you, but go ahead, buddy up. Get close enough to hear each other, and probably turn your body toward the person you're talking to would be a good body posture move. We're going to take about 3 more minutes, and so if there are some people who have not had a chance, make sure to take turns and give room for the other. And 1 more minute, and then 1 more minute, and then I'll bring us back together. All right, we'll wind up that thought that you're sharing. Wind that up, and then we'll come back together. If you can hear me, touch your nose. If you can hear me, touch your head. If you can hear me, shrug your shoulders. If you can hear me, wave. If you can hear me, touch your ear. All right, we're working back. Any teachers in the room? Yeah. So y'all knew what I was doing when I started. I started learning how to teach when I was 14 with like a class of 20 Chinese toddlers, like 3-year-olds who didn't speak English, and I was teaching them English. Teaching's like in my family's DNA, I think, but that was where I started. Now I do it in kind of different contexts, and with bigger people, but the same tricks work, right? It brought you all back. It brought you all back. So let's talk about what that was like. And I would imagine there's a variety of different experiences. And I watched, there are different places where pockets of emotion showed up. And maybe let's do it this way. I'd love first to talk about what was it like to be the recipient, to be the one who held? What was that experience like to be having someone share that with you, to be reflecting back? What was hard about it? What did you notice in the experience? Yeah. Yeah, so let's just talk about the listening part. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's hard. It's hard. And I mean, so I think what you're saying, I notice that a lot, that I'll be listening. And it makes sense that we would do this because listening to someone and seeing someone inherently impacts us, right? There's no way to actually be present and not be impacted. And so it makes sense that as we would be listening, it's pulling us into our own stories or our own experiences or how we would solve it or what we would do. And now we're listening to our thoughts. and we're not present with it. Did anyone else notice, like, was that hard to, like, just hear what the person was saying? So talk to me just a little bit about that particular experience. Yes. I I I love that experience that you're paralleling, right? Of what it is like to be the interpreter through which this conduit through which experiences transmit. And growing up, I was an interpreter for my dad. For everywhere he went, I would take me to interpret. And so that experience of going, I am receiving something that never becomes mine, that is always theirs. And so it's not mine to act on. It's not mine to do something. It's not mine to change. It's not mine to alter. My job as an interpreter is actually to be faithful to the person telling it, so that gets told in the way that the person who owns that is intending for it to be told. And actually, I would say that's exactly what we're trying to do in this exercise. And that so often, we want to be the fixers or the resolvers or the destination, but functionally what we're actually doing is helping provide a context that someone's story can come into the relationship. It's not just about coming to us, and it's not just about resolving, but we want it to come into the relationship in a way that honors the person who's telling it. And so this is why, like, that reflection is really hard, and that's why I gave this script. And when I'm working with clients in my office and working with, like, it is some of the hardest thing, particularly for, like, articulate people, to go like, oh, I could say this way better. Like, oh, I think what you're actually meaning is this. Like, I hear that you feel sad, but actually I think you feel bummed out and annoyed. And so we add language, or we interpret, or this is what I would feel, or like, it sounds, if I was you, I would be feeling this way. Like, not that that is bad, and there's places and time for that, but the question is whether or not we have the capacity to just be present with the person that's taking a risk with us. Not because that's the only thing to ever do. This is not the only way we converse. This is a particular skill that we need to have so that we can, because otherwise it's not even a choice. And fundamentally, I believe that one of the invitations of Jesus for us is actually to move to a place where we reclaim choice and agency. That so often what we do as we move through the woods, we're just living in constant reaction. Because if there are experiences we have that we're averse to, that we're not aware we're averse to, we just avoid them, right? So when we're not aware we're blind to things, we just operate, and we're not choosing anything. We're just reacting to the blindness that is there and just functioning with that. That the things that we're not aware of, we can't make choices about. And there's a big part of becoming aware and developing a skill. If I don't have a skill, I can't choose whether or not I use it. So sometimes we need to take this intentionality of, like, am I capable of literally just listening and just using your words and adding nothing of myself? That this is a space that I can participate in, but I participate in for you, not participate in for me. Can I just reflect your story so that I can hold you and I don't need to add any of me in? Not because that's what we always want to do, but because we need to be able to do that. Does that make sense? So let's keep, yes. 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 Yes, he sat and he listened, and when Taylor wanted to do this, joined him. When Taylor wanted to do this, joined him. When Taylor wanted to do this, joined him. Didn't add in, didn't throw in. Yeah, yes. Okay. Yes. 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 Practice, practice, practice. So my dad would say, when my dad was teaching English, he would say, people would always say, how do you learn English? My dad would say there's 5 steps. You listen, you learn, and then you practice, and then you practice, and then you practice. That's how you learn a language. That's how you learn a skill, which is why we're practicing here, because there isn't, like, that tendency is always going to be there, and it isn't bad, right? Like, please don't hear me say, don't help people, right? Please don't hear me say, hey, you have skills, withhold those from other people. That is not what we're after. But so often, just like in this book, people try to fix without seeing. People try to fix without knowing. People try to resolve without holding. And we know what it's like when someone tries to fix us without knowing us. And we know what it's like when someone tries to move us through a solution without having taken the time to actually understand the situation we're in and what we're experiencing. And it stinks. It stinks. Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Yes. Yes. And I would actually say you will be surprised at how many problems dissipate just through hearing. That so often we bring our problems, which are problems, but actually underneath that problem is a longing. Underneath that problem is suffering. Underneath that problem is disconnection and isolation and pain. And sometimes when we try to fix the problem, we never resolve the pain that sits underneath that. And often, and I don't have like data on this, but experientially, we're probably talking 50 to 75% range, that when people are coming like, I'm hurting, we sit and we listen. They're not hurting so much anymore. And actually some things that they thought really mattered to fix, they actually don't need fixed at all. They may not like it, but they don't need it fixed. Like, think about our kids and the number of times that they're hurting and they come and they have an idea for the solution that they need to their problem. Like, oh, I bonked my knee, I need a Band-Aid. I could go fix that and get you a Band-Aid, then we're resolved, but often underneath that is going, I'm hurt and I need comfort. I'm hurt and I need someone to know. I'm hurt and I need someone's attention. And actually when we provide comfort and we provide attention and when we listen and when we actually hear and identify what actually hurts, sometimes we still need to go get a Band-Aid. But a lot of times actually we don't. Like, it just doesn't hurt as much when we're seen. That actually the antidote to suffering isn't the removal of pain. And this is going back to what Kurt Thompson says in his book, The Deepest Place, where he says that all suffering starts as pain, but becomes suffering because of isolation and powerlessness. So the solution to suffering isn't the removal of pain, but the entrance of presence, which theologically is the incarnation. This is what Jesus did. This is the journey of Jesus that he invited us into, that into a suffering world, God sent his son, not to drag everyone out of their suffering, but to live among them. And I think sometimes we can overlook that before Jesus fixed anything, before his first miracle, before healing the sick, before casting out demons, and I am for all of those things. I am for solutions. I am for fix. There is plenty in this world that we need fixed. And we need Jesus to come and cast out demons and heal the sick, and we need to participate in this, and I am for this. But before Jesus cast out demons, before he healed anybody, before he did any miracles, he spent 30 years walking with his people. 30 years. 30 years. Listening to stories. Walking among the suffering of his people. And I often go like, wow. What? That's crazy. Right? The Son of God is hanging out with an oppressed people group under the thumb of the empire who are being beaten down and hurt and have no power. And he is God incarnate walking in town with all of the power of the universe to fix everything. And he spent 30 years eating meals, listening to stories, learning, talking, living life, not fixing. That blows my mind sometimes. I don't think I could do that. I mean, 30 minutes of just listening and not, woo, right? Like 30 seconds sometimes about like, I don't know if I want to incarnate into your story and not do anything. That sounds terrible. And this is why it's an invitation and why I think functionally going back to your question, because I think it's a really, really honest question. Like, how do we actually do this? Because our lives aren't set up. And what I would say is find 2 or 3 people to practice this with. Whereas once a week, let's get down, take this exercise, you put down your 4 quadrants, and then you just take turns just practicing. And often what I'll do is actually going back to the translator side, because translation, I've translated for some people that are really easy to translate for because they say a couple lines and let me translate, and then they say a couple lines and let me translate. And then there are other people who like give me 3 paragraphs, and you're like, whoa, 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 like, I'm trying to hear you and interpret and say. There's a whole lot to do when I got a page that I'm trying to do all at the same time. Slow down and break it down. And so part of that practice, and I was listening and kind of noticing how the conversation goes, and are people saying and allowing some people to reflect back, and some of us were telling and jumping into the story and not giving someone the opportunity to actually reflect that back and to see us. This is actually really clunky and really hard. And the goal is not that we just walk through all of our friendships in this like staggered, you say a line, I say a line, you say a line. Like, that's pretty clunky and would make pretty awkward conversation on a regular basis. Right? My wife and I are sitting around the dining room table, right, having dinner, and she says, today I went to the store, and what I'm hearing you say is today you went to the store, continue, right? And I got, like no, but the question is, are we familiar enough with it that when we sit with someone in pain, and they start to say something, they start to take a risk, we can go, what I'm hearing you say is you feel this about this. Do I get you? Like, yes. Okay, keep going. Okay, what I'm hearing you say is this about this. Did I get you? Okay, keep going. What I hear you say is this about this. Did I get you? Keep going. That practice, because what it allows in the community and what it allows in relationships is for me to actually know if I'm paying attention. Because sometimes I think I'm hearing stories, and I find out the story I heard was not the story they told. Right? And often marriage is where it shows up the most, where my wife was like, I told you that story. And I'm like, that is not the story that I heard you tell. And most of the time, those are stories I'm not checking in with, and we're not doing. And sometimes when you get better, we can kind of summarize paragraphs and do that. But really, for the practice of it, I would say literally get 2 or 3 people. And once a week, take 30 minutes. Sit down, fill out your quadrant. And if you need a template, a PDF, I can send you a PDF. If you just want to have these to print out, you can just draw a line on your paper, right? It's a pretty simple thing. But it's get 2 or 3 people and spend 6 weeks, once a week, 30 minutes. Let's just check in about this. We're each going to take turns. Here's what's in my quadrants. You go through yours, and we're just practicing going back and forth. If you spend 6 weeks doing this with 2 or 3 people, for 30 minutes each week, you will find that it actually begins to translate into some other conversations in a couple ways. 1, you'll check in more. Like, hey, I'm hearing this. Is that actually what you're saying? 2, it actually would change how you pay attention. Because I think someone was describing that in the listening, how often we get into our own heads and start tracking what we're thinking, and we actually stop paying attention. And that's the other part of this that is practice. I'm actually just practicing paying attention to what you are saying. Not to what I'm thinking about what you're saying, not to how I'm feeling about what you're saying. I'm just paying attention to what you're saying because I think you are deserving of the honor of being heard. Because that's what we're doing when we're listening, is we're communicating to someone, you deserve being heard. We can do a lot of other things, but the baseline of your value as a human and as a child of God is you deserve to be seen and to be heard. And if in this moment that is the only thing I do, then that will be the only thing that I do. And from there, like we saw in the Rabbit Listens, so many things come from there. And actually so much creativity comes from there, and solutions we hadn't thought of come from there. And even more than that, the connection of relationship deepens from there. Does that make sense? Okay. So a couple more comments about the receiving and the being, the listener. Any reaction? What did you notice?
I noticed you kind of hit on just a while ago, what you were saying, that a lot of times when someone's telling a story, we have a tendency to check out and everything. And so I was more geared towards making sure I was hearing what was coming across. And a lot of times, like I said, it was a little stressful
Uh-huh.
because I want to make sure I'm not going to mess this up. And so that's where
Yes.
practice comes in.
Yes.
Everything as far as doing that. I want to you're constantly making sure that you're giving that person the attention. So
Yes.
I would say it was scary
Mm-hmm.
and at the same nervous to make sure that I was hearing the other participant.
Yes. 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 So this is why I think having intentional practice spaces matter, because one of the things that often happens is we won't necessarily cue into the kind of conversation we're in until after we're in it. And so if we're sitting with someone and we're like halfway into a conversation, it's like, they're just wanting me to listen. And I was not in that headspace. Like when my wife and I discovered that prefacing a conversation changed our marriage of actually going, hey, do you have a minute? I just want you to listen, don't fix. And we just prepped each other. Or, hey, here's a conversation. I actually do want a solution. Engage, but letting the other person know this is how, this is what this moment is, alters it, because then we don't catch each other off guard of I'm thinking we're problem solving and you just want to be heard. And now I'm mad at you for not giving me a heads up, and you're mad at me for trying to fix something you didn't need fixed. And now we're at odds with each other. And instead of a moment to lean into, find connection in suffering, suffering actually becomes combative, right? And so but to get there, we need to be able to practice this, because to say, hey, just let me know when you want me to listen, and then our partner or our friend goes, hey, you got 15 minutes that you can just listen, and we're like, good, and then we get into listening going, I don't know how to do this. That is also problematic. And so creating some spaces to practice, because when we're learning this, it actually is stressful. When we're learning this, it is scary. When we're learning it is different, which is why we need practice. Think about sports and think you learn your fundamentals and you learn your skills and you do your drills not in game time, because it's stressful to learn some of these skills. And so we go to the practice field, we go to the gym, we go practice some of these, and then we get fluid, and then we go in the game, and we just get to use them fluidly in the game. But we don't typically, in sports, you don't typically incorporate a new skill into a game in real time without spending some time practicing before the game. And so if you hear this, find some people. If this is something you want to incorporate into how you do relationship, find people to practice with.
So I have to chuckle because you said if your wife did this, then
Yes.
I don't usually fix this, or I want you to fix this. But Brian and I learned early in our marriage that Brian's a fixer, and so I learned early on, to set the parameter. I don't want you to fix this. I just want you to listen. And so I'll do that, and I have for many, many years. But I often will forget to say when I do want him to fix it.
Hey, and then he just listens?
And then he just listens.
Props to you, Brian. Nice. Nice.
And then I'll get frustrated. I'll be like, why aren't you fixing it?
Yes.
And then I'm like, oh, not a big deal. And then I recognize, oh, that's my own fault, because I conditioned him
Yes.
to just listen.
Yes. Well, and you have allowed him to know you, right? And to trust that what you need, you'll ask for.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I had to kind of
That's funny. Yeah.
and he's done such a good job
Yes.
of learning to just
Yes.
listen.
I still remember.
Oh, no, I really do want you
Yeah.
to fix this.
I still remember the apartment we were in, the color of the paint on the wall, where we were sitting, when my wife looked at me for the first time 5 years into marriage, and she looked at me, she said, wow, you've really learned how to listen without judgment. I can tell you where we were, because that wasn't always true. And that was a big part of my journey, was actually learning how to listen. And the reason I remember it is because I remember the look on her face and how profound it was for her to have someone that she walked deeply in relationship with that actually could see her and actually could sit with her and actually could hold her when she needed it. Yeah, and that room and that moment is imprinted in my mind, partially because it was like, oh, it actually was as big a deal as she was saying it was. It wasn't just like, hey, this would be a really nice thing if you knew how to listen. It was actually like, no, there's something deeply within me that longs to be seen and heard in this way. So let's talk a little bit about the other side. What was it like to share? What was it like to put things on the table, to take that risk? What did you notice? What was hard? What was beautiful? What was the experience like? Jen.
I didn't have any problem sharing. My issue was I wanted to share more.
Uh-huh.
And so just the struggle of an exercise like this is always like there's a time.
Yes.
When I'm like, no, I actually really love to actually have this kind of connection.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so now we need to get coffee.
Uh-huh.
So that was my struggle. Like I want to be open for that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so there's two things about that. There's a beautiful side of that, and then there's a shadow side of that, just as there is to everything, right? One is when we get in these conversations, we discover that some people can actually hold us more than we realized. You know, like, oh, we can keep going, and this person can hold us. They're also, and not describing that situation, but as an example to describe this, there are other moments where when we haven't been held in a while, and we start to share something and someone shows a capacity to hold us a little bit, we get really excited and we're like, oh, well, maybe they can hold more. And we start to put more on the table. And so there actually is a discipline in learning to practice being measured, not because we're trying to withhold, but sometimes we need to give the relationship time to catch up. That we have this experience that is beautiful, that gives us imagination for what the relationship could become, that sometimes we actually need to still go through some small moments. Because my wife likes to say that as Christians, we may not be a fan of like sexual hookups, but we do emotional hookups all the time. Where we just show up and we just go, here's my whole story, here's my deepest self, here's the thing, because I want you to hold me and I want you to experience me. And if you take the whole thing, then I can trust you for all of it. And actually, trust is actually built most strongly when I take here is a piece and I put it on the table. And we just pause there, we assess, then I take another piece. That trust is built the strongest when we start at honest and then move to more honest. And then we hang in more honest for a while and we really assess that, can we actually do this? Can you consistently hold my most honest? Do you have availability to show up for my most honest? Are you going to be around other components of my more honest that you are going to get reactive to, that we're going to need to figure out how do we talk about that and really establish that trust in the more honest before we jump down into the most honest? And it's hard because I think inherently deep inside all of us is a longing to be held in the most honest way. And sometimes when we get honest and we're like, oh, I can picture it, I can see it, like I want to trust, and we'll go, like and sometimes it works, and it's incredible. And we like find kindred souls that we didn't know existed, and we're just fast friends, and sometimes it works out, and other times we go streaking down that into the most honest, and haven't given the relationship time to demonstrate trust, and find that they couldn't hold as much as we thought that they could hold. And I'm just saying, I would way rather find that out in the more honest space than the most honest space. Because I can recover a little bit easier if I've gone more honest with you and discover, okay, not holding anything against you and not throwing you under the bus, but like we all have different experiences. We all have different things that impact us. And there are some stories that I can hold a lot of, and there are other types of stories that really impact me. Right? There's certain kinds of pain that I got all the room for. You need to tell those stories, we'll sit all day. And then there are some kinds of stories that go like, 5 minutes in that story and my body is shot. And I can't just keep sitting here. I need to get up and go walk. I need to get up and do. In that we need to test out in a more honest space before we really move into the most honest place. So this exercise, part of the intent is actually to practice moderating ourselves to say, can I allow room for the story to progress? Can I give it time to build? Can I say one thing and pause? And then add another thing and pause. And then add another thing and pause. And what does that practice look like? Is actually part of what it's doing is allowing room for trust to be built. Because each time I say something, and you reflect and we pause, that builds a little trust. And then I do it again, and it builds trust. And I do it again and build trust. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's not saying like curiosity coming and the desire for more, phenomenal, let's lean into it. But also pay attention that actually there would be some places where it wouldn't be wise to move too quickly down into the tiers of honesty, where the relationship hasn't yet caught up or become strong enough to hold it. Other experiences in the sharing and in someone else hearing you. So not just in what it was like to share, but also what was it like to be heard and to be seen in that way. It's kind of weird and mysterious sometimes. Like I literally just fed you the line and you fed it back to me, and somehow something happened that feels it's not like life altering, but going like, oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, other observations or experiences of, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Can I ask you a question about that? Was it because of the limited time, or because of like not being sure how someone is going to hear? Because yes, yes, uh-huh, yes, yes. And I would actually encourage us that I think there's some room to really practice just being honest for a while. For that reason is we got actually a whole lot of information, and some of us move into more honest. So this is not saying like, hey, back away from all your relationships, but to create some spaces where actually we just practice that fundamental. Like, here is how we dribble the basketball. This is how we just sit in the honest space without moving further. We're not doing crossovers. We're not going between the legs. We're just dribbling the basketball for a while. We're going to focus on that, of just practicing that, because for a couple reasons. One, it's a really great skill. But two, when we're engaging in relationships with other people, we actually don't know their comfort zone of where maybe they've never been more honest with anybody. And so they have a capacity to hold, but they don't know how to be held. And so I'm moving down, and what that does is that amplifies the bifurcation within our community of I end up just finding people who can hold me, but I don't give them an opportunity to also learn how to be held, because the deepest, richest, most intimate, life-giving, transformative, healing relationship is when we both sit in the most honest place. If I'm most honest and you're honest, this doesn't transform us. This doesn't make us, our community, richer and deeper and stronger. And so what we end up doing is we got some people that go all the way down and some people that are still up here. And the community as a whole doesn't become deeper and stronger and richer and more healed together, that we end up with, if we go back to the body of Christ, we end up with like one really strong arm with giant biceps and the other arm that just kind of like dangles, which is a pretty clunky body. And I think if we look at our churches and our communities, that actually we have a lot of our communities function that way. We got some really like one strong arm. And I think like I grew up, my dad had polio, so he had one leg that was 3 inches shorter than the other and stopped growing when he was 10. And he walked with a limp because he had to have a raised shoe. That's what a lot of churches look like. You got one real strong leg, and he plants on that, and he's good. And then the other one needs some support. Then he plants real strong, and he needs some support. And actually what we're after is 2 strong legs and 2 strong arms and a strong whole body that actually can lean on each other and can go back and forth, and isn't just you going, oh, I need you to stay strong so you can hold me, but I don't know if I can get strong enough to hold you. That leg wears out, that leg falls, that leg collapses, our communities break down, relationships end. You're tracking where I'm going. So we all need to be in this process together. And because of that, there are those of us who may be more comfortable going into the more honest, most honest space that actually need to learn how to take our time. to allow others to become safe enough with us that we can go together to the more honest place. And safe enough together that we can go together to the most honest space. Because if we drop too fast, they'll just stay. Just going like, I'm not ready to go where you're going, but I'll let you go there, and now this is just our dynamic. Does this make sense? So again, not a blanket statement for all relationships everywhere, but some things for us to be paying attention to as we're wanting to take risks with each other. Okay? One or two other kind of reactions, experiences to being heard and having someone reflect back to you. Right? Yes? Yeah. Yeah. Well, some of us know what it is like to be experienced by someone as a burden in the way that people toss off burdens. Some of us grew in families where we literally had to learn how to not burden our parents. Or we're in relationships where like, no, actually, if I become a burden, I'm unwanted. If I become a burden, that they don't have time for me. If I become a burden, like being a burden in many relationships has been bad. So it would be really strange to come into a relationship and going, I actually like carrying your burdens. Going like, no, you don't. And even if you do, how do I trust that? Because maybe you think you do, and then you'll experience the kind of burden that I am, and then you'll reconsider that whole framework of life and realize you don't actually like carrying burdens, and I would rather not be the person you discover that with. So I just won't be a burden, right? Like this is how our brains, and it makes sense, which is why it is this risk that we know theologically and we know scripturally that it is about sharing one another's burdens and caring, which means that at some point we are supposed to be a burden, and that actually this is participating in the hospitality of the body of Christ, and actually it allows the cultivation of the gifts of others who need to learn how to hold, and they can't learn how to hold if I don't give them something to hold. So by not sharing, by not being a burden, I actually disable others from developing the capacity to learn how to hold that the whole body needs, right? That's the big picture, but the reality, the emotional, relational reality, is that as scary as I'll get out. I want someone else to practice being the burden, so if they get dropped, I can fix. I don't want to take the risk to be the burden and get dropped because I've been there, done that, disinterested again. And this comes back to going, we cannot overlook how risky this whole venture is, which is why we need to be talking about it, and why this is where, like, if we can get honest about, just not even more honest than most honest, if we can just get honest about how risky it is, how dangerous it is, about all the ways that it can go wrong, about actually the 15 reasons that I probably shouldn't trust any of you, and you shouldn't trust me. And not saying we're going to live our life by those, but can we at least acknowledge that actually there's a whole bunch of reasons we shouldn't trust each other? I don't know where you're from. I don't know your backstory. I don't know what causes you to react. I don't know what button I'm going to poke, and then you're going to get frustrated with me, and maybe you getting frustrated means you getting mad, and maybe you getting frustrated means you just ghost me. Yeah? Like, there's all sorts of reasons. And if we can start to get honest about the risk and about the significance of what we're doing, we can begin to move toward that. So, any other thoughts, reactions, observations about that exercise? Any questions that are emerging in you that are like, I just need to ask this? Okay. So I want to draw our attention back to that little map on the very front page. I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and then I'm going to move us to one thing. I told you we'd kind of weave in and out. So in this map, when we're talking about the sacred heavy, right, the things that we're holding, and the things that you put in the quadrants, those are examples of your sacred heavy. That the glad things as well as the sad things, that sacred heavy, this is actually one of the reasons I use the phrase sacred heavy and not just what is pain and suffering, because actually sometimes we're carrying some pretty exciting things, and if I am freaking thrilled about life, but I'm walking with some friends who are going through some really heavy things, what do you think I do with what I'm really thrilled with life? I just hold that back. I just keep that over here because I don't want to put that on the table. I don't want to burden someone with my joy. Right? Now I'm going to be mad. I want to make it look like I'm better than other people and my life is great. And I'm sorry, your life sucks. So actually, when we talk about the sacred heavy, we're not just talking about pain. We're talking about anything that we're carrying that we feel disallowed or unable to bring into relationship. Because all of that carries weight. Every one of those moments in the stories, like joy, carries weight too, particularly if we're holding it alone. If I'm just sitting here going like, and then I see, and I got to wipe that smile off my face because like I don't want to make you feel bad. Now I'm holding that alone, and now I'm suppressing joy and delight. And happiness and joy become weighty when we carry them alone. So our sacred heavy is anything that we're removing from a relationship or holding back or feel disallowed or unable to bring into relationship. And our journey in brave relationships is saying, how do we become people that can welcome the whole person and the whole community? That how do we become communities that can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn at the same time? What do we do when we have a room where some people are rejoicing and some people are mourning? Because this is what I've watched this happen far too often in churches, where you end up with the grieving churches and the celebrating churches. So if you're in a good place, you got churches that we celebrate and we delight and we have victory and we have joy. And so if you're rejoicing, you go join those who are rejoicing. But then you have some people who are not rejoicing. But that's a rejoicing church. So I'm not going to go to that church. I'm going to go find a church that sits and laments and sings sad songs and holds room for that. And we end up segregating our own churches in this way as well. Think about all the ways that the church just keeps splicing itself apart and moving us because we actually don't know how to do and have room for all of it. The whole church, the whole person, the whole gospel. And part of that is if you got someone in a room who's rejoicing and you got someone in a room who's grieving, how do we hold room for both of them at the same time? I can tell you we'll never figure that out if we can't be honest that they're both existing in the room at the same time. The starting place is to name it. The starting place is say, we're rejoicing and we're grieving. The starting place is to go, our community is both delighted and heartbroken. That's the starting place, is to name that both of those are coexisting. And then we can determine together what needs to be held and who needs to be held and how do we do that. But we start with that honesty. Because that gives permission for all of it. And we take time and we practice. So when we're talking about the sacred heavy, this movement that we've been following today is that front end is the approach. Right? This is where we talked about acknowledging the risk. The other piece that I wanted to put in that we kind of skipped over as we got to the exercise was that responsibility piece that's in part of the approach. And we've kind of talked about it implicitly in the conversation that we've had. But sometimes when we approach the sacred heavy of others and we find that it is a lot, or we enter into their story and they got big feelings that kind of scare us, or in their big feelings, they say things that we don't like, or they do things that frustrate us, and now we're having a reaction to their reaction, and so actually now I wish that I had never even approached your sacred heavy. That there's a big piece to being able to be brave communities who engage in brave relationship, which is being able to see our own reactivity in the way that it get kicked up. And this is what we spent a lot of time focusing on last year. This is why we start with being brave people who then can engage in brave relationships. So I included in your worksheets some of those slides from last year that we talk about when we are secure in our sense of identity, and when we're secure in the trustworthiness of relationships around us, what we actually find is we love well and we listen well and we walk well and we're empowered to do brave things. But when pain shows up, it jacks with our sense of identity and it undermines our sense of safety in the world, and we don't take risks. If we don't feel safe, it is hard to be brave. And so on the worksheet, you can see the way that it's broken out, I've put some language around those two sides. And so So when we talk about the pain that disrupts our identity, we're talking about things like unworthy and unloved. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want to bring this back to your attention. Because if we don't know the pain that we carry, as we become brave in relationship, that pain is going to get stepped on, is going to get kicked, is going to get poked at, and now we're going to be in pain. And I can tell you this, when we're in pain, we don't build relationship, we destroy relationship every single time. So if my distrust of humanity got poked because someone betrayed me last week and now I'm in a conversation and I'm still reacting because I don't trust anyone, I am not going to be warm and welcoming to you. I'm going to be suspicious and I'm going to be bracing myself. I may not even know it because this is something that happened yesterday or last week that just caused me to question whether or not I actually trust people. If we're not aware when we get poked and our pain shows up, we're going to be pretending that we're being brave. We're actually just going to keep damaging relationships. So I want to put this in front of you again. If you aren't clear on what's the pain that jacks you up, get clear on that. I can point you in some directions, connect you to some resources. We can do a virtual workshop where we walk through this together a little bit more, if that would be something. But if we're going to be brave, we have to know the things that show up in our lives that actually prevent us from being able to be brave. And if I'm in a spot where I'm feeling unworthy, I'm not going to take a risk because you might prove it right. Does this make sense? We tracking? Okay, so I don't want to camp on this. I think you still probably have the video from last year. That Pastor David, is that the training that we did last year? Is that still accessible somewhere? Possibly? Maybe? Okay.
Somebody was asking me already.
Okay. Because that, so if you're in the spot of going like, what did we look? I would just start there. You got the content, walk through that, the training from last year, and get really clear on what hurts you and what do you do. Because if you're feeling your identity is disrupted and you're blaming other people, we're not going to make a whole lot of progress in being brave in relationship. Or if we're trying to take control, because it really requires us to be grounded. So in the approach to engaging bravely with the sacred heavy, we have to be able to acknowledge the risk. And that's what we're talking about. Hey, this whole thing is inherently risky. Let's not assume that it's just natural and easy. And we have to be able to be responsible for our own pain. Because if we can do those things, now we actually are able to actually fulfill the approach and begin to enter in. And this is where what we practice today. And you'll see these words on the map of empathy and honor, which actually have been woven through so much of what we've talked about today. Right? And actually, like the clearest example, so when Pastor Dave, when you and Michelle were up here and you were sharing, both in the moment, Michelle, your empathy towards David in that moment, right, of just holding, of seeing, right? Empathy is this, is when someone is expressing something difficult, your face actually shifts to come closer to matching their face. So when someone is experiencing something, in a state of empathy, our face will actually shift to begin to match theirs. So thinking about it, so a lot of us intuitively do this as parents when we're holding our kids and they're crying, and so we'll make our faces that kind of like match theirs, or they're scared and we'll make our faces, and we just kind of begin to mirror their faces, because this is actually bringing us emotionally into a place where we are feeling the feeling that they are feeling, and we're meeting them in the place of suffering. Right? So empathy is actually emotionally entering into the experience that is being there. So David, when you shared, the facial expressions of people in the room shifted. Tears came to eyes. Bodies softened. People leaned forward. Right? Breathing slowed down. Like physiologically we shifted. Facial expressions shifted. Our body posture shifted. Because actually that moment, because we recognize your pain, our bodies responded with empathy, which was to enter into that pain with you. So this is what we talk about. When we talk about empathy, isn't just going, wow, you shared a really hard thing. Oh, here's 3 steps for you. Or even, wow, that's really hard. Do you need a recommendation for a therapist? Kinds. Not empathy. Empathy is the rabbit of going, hey, can I sit with you? Actually, empathy was collectively us going, we're just going to stop right here for a minute. And Dave, we're just going to hang out with you for a minute. We're going to feel this with you for a minute. We're just going to be together. That empathy is actually, we're just going to stop. We're going to acknowledge it. We're just going to sit for a minute. We don't have to stay here forever. Actually, sometimes when we're really empathetic and we like lean in, it's often the person we're leaning in with is like, okay, done. Enough empathy. Like, stop, right? Like, even in the rabbit, listen, there came a point where Taylor was like, okay, I'm ready to be pissed now. Okay, like, I'm ready to, like, let's throw some stuff. Like, okay, let's go. I'm ready to build. It wasn't the rabbit that was like, hey, have you had enough empathy? That actually, just like our children, like, our kids get hurt and they got big feelings. They don't stay there forever. Contrary to how much we freak out about it, none of our feelings last forever. None of our feelings last forever. And actually, they last far less when they're met with empathy. And they tend to hang out longer when there's not empathy that's there. And so actually, you want to move through deep emotions faster? Lean in harder. Become more present. Listen more clearly. Sit with more empathy. That's actually the only way to expedite it. Because actually, when we try to pull people out before they're ready, they go right back to it as soon as they get the chance. We try to fix people before they're ready to be fixed. They will undermine whatever effort you make to fix them. You're like, here's all the great ideas, and they're like, that's dumb, and that's dumb, and that's dumb. Yeah, because they actually haven't had someone sit and hold them long enough. Right? When was the last time you tried to like convince a tantruming 3-year-old to alter their course of behavior in real time? No. You got to wait till that tantrum is done. You got to wait till their bodies have settled. You got to wait till they're seen and they're held and they're comforted. Now we can find some solutions to move forward. But empathy is that starting spot. So we've been practicing that today. And there's some moments, and there were moments as you guys were sharing with each other where your faces shifted because there's recognition of, oh, this is the story you're telling. And often it's going, oh, I know that pain. Oh, let me sit in this with you. And there's a settling in. And that empathy is actually when we allow ourselves to be drawn more close to the other person's experience. We want to fix it. And here, I want to clarify this. It doesn't even mean that we agree with their experience. Because this is a spot that a lot of people get really confused about. Go, okay, if I'm going to lean in with empathy, that means that like I'm agreeing that you think the reason you're hurting is the reason you're hurting. I actually don't have to. Right? That example of that kid in the bathroom and his mom that went upstairs, bust open the door. An example of empathy is getting down on the floor with that 3-year-old and go, man, mommy just opened that door into your head. Mommy hurt you. I'm so sorry. And sitting in that experience of what it must be like for a 3-year-old to have their mother slam a door into their head. Some of us know what that's like when parents do that intentionally. But to a 3-year-old, it actually doesn't make a difference. They just have this experience. So a non-empathetic response would be, hey, I'm sorry that hurt. I didn't intend that to happen. I'm really sorry you're feeling that way. And there's this explanation, or there's this defense, or there's this justification, which from the parent's standpoint isn't a lie. Like what the mom would be saying in that moment, or the dad, and right, would be a true statement. I did not intend to hurt you. That was not done on purpose. Not untrue. Not helpful. Empathy is what allows us to restore connection. And I will tell you, connection precedes everything that is good. Connection precedes everything that is good. And empathy is our pathway into restoring connection. And if we skip over that, we won't resolve things. This is why God started, he sent Jesus into the world, incarnated into our suffering to walk with us in a place of empathetic walking and listening and seeing and feeling, because no one will be able to convince me that Jesus could spend 30 years walking among his people and not feel and know his people's pain. That's empathy. I'm going to feel it, I'm going to see it, I'm going to walk with it. We're in it. Does this make sense? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Correct. Well, so so technically you aren't, because the 3-year-old would say you did this on purpose, right? So it doesn't mean that I'm ascribing that, oh, I'm going to agree and say, yes, I did do that on purpose. Like, I'm not going to take on things that aren't. But in there is pain that, like, if I stepped on someone's toes, I stepped on their toes, right? If I said something that I thought was benign, and I thought, like, I come home and, like, so I'll just be honest about my story. One of the things that I hate the most, that's actually probably an exaggeration, but it gives you, I strongly dislike this. So there's this dynamic that happens in my home from time to time where my wife will vocalize a thing that she would like to be done. Typically, it's a thing that I don't think about often or don't do regularly. And so, okay, she'll tell me it needs to be done. And I'm like, okay, got it. And it isn't that. Like, often I'll do it and it'll be fine. But there are these moments where she'll say it, I'll log it, and then I will make a plan to go, okay, at this time, right? So, hey, can you start dinner? Get us going. I'm like, yep, okay, got it. In my head, I go, okay, I'm going to start it at 5:30. And then at 5:25, in comes my wife. I haven't started dinner. She just starts making dinner. I don't know what's going on. What would be easy for me to go, like, she doesn't trust me, so she's like, all of this stuff, like, she thinks I'm a failure and I'm a bum, and once again, I failed and I'm not doing my part, and all the places that my mind could go. And then what'll come out of that is I'll get frustrated and pissed and either storm off, or I'll go and try, like, get out of the kitchen, it's my job, and then we'll be in a fight. An empathetic response would be, what's happening? What's going on in this moment? Because from that vantage point, neither of us are inherently wrong, because she could say, I asked him to do something, he didn't do it. That's fair. And I'm sitting over here, I had a plan, you didn't give me a chance. Also true. And so it doesn't mean that I have to then receive and take on this blame of going, oh, I did not follow through, therefore this is all my fault. But what I can acknowledge is going, she had a different framework in her mind. I didn't know about that, and we can have a whole different conversation about whether or not that should have been communicated, and if that would have been helpful for me to know. Did she actually mean start at 5:15, but didn't say that? But the place for empathy is to go, she really wanted me to be helpful, and she experienced me not being helpful. I can join her in the sadness with that. Like, that sucks. Now, or I can defend myself and justify my behavior and do my thing, but the reality is going, that's how she experienced that moment, rightly or wrongly, right? And we can sit and this is where, like, we can get real nitpicky with, like, how we explain and justify, and when we do, we actually miss going, like, and actually, like, most of those times, those happens on days where there's been a lot going on in her. She's a counselor as well, and so there's a lot going on in her world and other work and other things, and she's sitting in a place where she just hasn't felt supported. And then often we'll offer this thing about, like, man, this would be great if I felt supported by my husband in this way. And often I find out about that later, just because this is how life works. And so when I get all the information, we go, like, oh, this whole thing makes sense. But the temptation is we end up in these fights without all the information, and the information we have is justifiable and it's defendable and it's not wrong. And the invitation of empathy is going, can we just suspend judgment for a moment? Can we just not sit and go, like, nobody has to be right, nobody has to be wrong in this moment. What we can do is go and look at this moment and go, this moment sucks. This moment was hard for you. You're disappointed. You were wanting something from me that I did not give. That is a true thing. I got opinions about how it came to be that she was disappointed. That doesn't negate the disappointment that she held. And so I can choose to defend myself, or I can choose to lean in with empathy and say, I let you down, because I did let her down. I didn't plan to let her down. I didn't intend to let her down. I actually had a plan that wouldn't have let her down. I didn't get a chance to implement it. You can clearly see I still have feelings about this. And we still have work to do in our own communication and all of this. But it doesn't negate the reality that I did let her down. That was her experience. And our invitation is to lean in with empathy with the experience that is being had, not needing to prove or justify. Because I will tell you this, if someone is expressing pain, there is real pain there somewhere. Pain is always true. How it gets expressed, what we describe, what we blame as our source of pain, that gets real muddled and confusing sometimes. But if someone's expressing reactivity to pain, something hurts. Right? My little kids, they start going like my foot hurts and my knee hurts and my back hurts and my head hurts. And we went through like 15 things that they were saying hurt before we actually got to the thing of going, oh, this is the thing that actually hurts. But when my kids don't hurt, they don't make up things that hurt. They may hurt emotionally and make up physical things because they don't know how to talk about the emotional things that are hurting. And so they're like, my foot hurts, when it's actually their heart that hurts. So we may misascribe, but we don't make up pain. Like we got plenty of real pain. Like none of us can be like, you know what I want to do today? Let me create a fake story about pain. We may create fake stories, but the pain is always real. And the invitation of empathy is actually to pay attention to the places of pain, even if we don't understand them. Does that make sense? Maybe a little bit. Maybe our minds are going, oh. Okay. So approach, enter. We talked about empathy, and we talked about honor. And I hope you are paying attention to how many times people were thanked today for taking risks, where it was acknowledged how brave they were, where it's talked about like that was brave of you to say that. Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for trusting that. I hope you've been paying attention because when we talk about honor in brave relationships, we are honoring the risk that is being taken, that actually no one owes anyone any of their story. No one who walks into our churches owes us any of their story. We don't owe each other any of our story. And actually, if we leaned on our data sets of our lives, most of us probably wouldn't share any of our story with anybody. So the honor is always acknowledging the risk that is there and not missing it and catching it. Even if it's retrospective, like there are times where people share a story with me and it doesn't register in the moment, and I get home and I go, oh, I think that was them taking a risk with me. So I text them later like, hey, thank you for telling me that story. Like that was a gift to me that you honored me with that story and allowed me to hold that. Because what we want to do is if someone is being brave, we want them to know that we see that they're being brave. Because it is not fun to drum up a whole bunch of courage and do a really hard thing and be brave and have people go, eh. And going like, wow, like that took a lot of effort. It's like making a really nice meal and then your toddlers are like, I want pizza. And you're like, come on, right? And you're like, it feels devaluing and it feels frustrating. So we approach through taking responsibility and through acknowledging the risk. We enter into the sacred heavy through empathy and honoring the story. The rupture and repair piece is part of what we've been talking about, is going, when things break down, what do we do with that? And this is where like let's bring up the spectrum to the place of honesty of going, I didn't like that. How do we acknowledge moments when we're missed? This is what we were practicing some of this in that quadrant exercise. This is why that question, did you get me? Because part of the repairing the rupture is us being able to say, you didn't get me on that one. You missed me. And so, and I'm going to say this again, find some people to practice this with. Because if we can't say, nope, you didn't get me, in a de-escalated practice space, the likelihood of being with a friend or being in a marriage and having a moment where a partner misses us, we're just going to roll right through that and go, I don't want to make it a thing because I'm going to say you missed me. And then they're going to be, no, I didn't. I got you. And now we're in an argument about whether or not they missed me. Like it's to be able to just say, you missed me. You didn't get me. So again, get into a practice space for that. And in the piece with that, which goes back to the responsibility that we've been talking about, and the word on there is ownership. And that's the examples that we just talked through, like the example I shared with my wife, is being able to own without trying to explain and justify. This is a major part of repair. That actually, if my wife comes in and I am just defending myself, and the reality is I'm justified to defend myself in that situation. Like, from a content data standpoint, I got ground to stand on. I'm not wrong. She told me she did not put a time on it. I had a plan, and I know that I was going to do that. I got ground to stand on to go, not my fault. Appropriate, like understandable, but not helpful. Right? So the ownership piece is part of what allows us to restore connection. Because again, connection precedes everything good. Connection is always a starting spot. So if our goal is connection, if our goal is moving relationships forward, if our goal is moving into places where life and transformation and healing happen in relationships, holding on to justification and defending and explaining ourselves actually doesn't get us there. It's justifiable. Like, you can keep doing it. Like, sure, I'm not going to say, like, no, there's no reason you should be doing that. Like, yes, there's room to justify yourself. It just won't get you to connection. And so that ownership piece of, right, that story with the mom opening the door of just owning, yes, I did that to you. I harmed you. And in my head, when we own in our heads, it's so hard to quiet down that voice because there's still that part in our head that goes, but I didn't mean to, and I didn't do it on purpose, and I didn't mean for you to get hurt this bad, and I think you're blowing this out of proportion, and right, all of the places that our brains go, because it's actually really hard just to go, I hurt you and I'm sorry. And just stop there. Which is why, circling back to the quadrant exercise, practicing saying a thing and stopping actually is a really useful skill in a number of places. Because just owning and stopping. Oftentimes, and I watch so many people who will start out of the gate owning. Go, yep, I hurt you, I'm sorry. And then they can't stop themselves, and like their momentum just carries them over to go like, I hurt you and I'm sorry, and also I didn't intend that to be that way, and also why are you so mad at me? And this happened the other day too, and can we figure out a way to fix this? And then you just keep going, and now you're back into the conflict. And actually, it would be much more helpful to say, I hurt you and I'm sorry, full stop. But I can almost, like saying that, I can almost feel like the moment, like the momentum that just wants, like it is hard. It is hard just to say a thing and stop. So I'm going to say, get into some practice spaces, use the 4 quadrants, right? I'm going to say, hey, you missed me. Let's try this again. We don't need to explain and justify. Just going, yep, I missed you. I'm sorry. Let's try again. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Correct. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I hurt you. Yeah. And this is the difficulty, because when we think about holding and being held, right? In that moment, I don't want to hold her. So me, because functionally me saying, I'm sorry I hurt you, is me holding her. And I'm sitting here going, you just layered an accusation at me. I need you to hold me because I'm hurting. That's what's happening in that moment. And so it feels terrible because I'm going like, I need to be held, darn it. We're like, no, and if I hold you, then no one holds me. And what about the pain that I'm in? And now, like, I need to be held. You're going, right, that's why this is so hard. Because actually healing and connection would be me developing the capacity to be able to go, yes, this also is a moment I want to be held. But more than being held in this moment, I want connection with you, because I know that over the course of time, if we know how to find and return to connection, we're both going to get held all that we need. But in the moment, we panic and go, no, I need to be held in this moment right now. And a lot of that is because we weren't held in moments that we needed to be held growing up, and that never came back. And so it's hard to imagine that with friends and with people in our community, with our partners, that if I forego being held in this moment for your sake, my pain narrative would say, I'm just never going to be held ever. The imagination of the kingdom of God is going, we are people who hold, and then we're held, and then we hold, and then we're held, and then we hold, and then we're held. And as we do this together, actually all of us are soothed, and all of us are taken care of. We carry one another's burdens, and we fulfill the law of Christ. We become more whole, and the love of God is demonstrated, and people are healed, and the name of Jesus is glorified. But in the moments, sometimes we just freaking want to be held. We put our foot down and go, no. Which is fine. It won't be helpful, but it's justifiable. And I think that's the distinction in that space. Does that make sense? But it's really hard to forego being held to hold your partner. Yes, and then David and then Jen.
Yeah, so, okay, so I'm going to try to lean into her question.
Yes.
So then do you communicate in a way that then you can be held? That's question one.
Uh-huh.
So in that story,
Uh-huh.
is there a second part to your story? Or if the person
Great question.
doesn't hold you,
Uh-huh.
what is your response?
Yeah, so the first question actually goes back to the question you asked, or the conversation that emerged from your question, is actually it will surprise you how often, once you restore connection, you actually don't need to be held the way that you thought you needed to be held. Because oftentimes, like when we're hurting each other, we're going like, no, it's simple. I'm not going to forgive you first. You forgive me first. And actually, when we just set that aside and just reform connection, it doesn't matter who starts. We just need to get connected. And actually, once we're connected, we just look at each other and go, oh, you do love me. Oh, I do love you. And whatever the thing was that we were freaking out about, we're not freaking out about it the way we were. And actually, we find that in those moments of connection, when we are truly in connection, it actually becomes possible to hold each other at the same time. In true connection, in full connection, it becomes possible to hold each other at the same time. And the things that we needed to throw down and defend don't become as important. Now, there are moments, right? In particular, I'm thinking about moments that are like patterns or things that emerge over time. That once we have restored connection, then we go, hey, can we talk about this thing that keeps happening? Right? Can we talk about, like, I think our timelines in our heads are different, or like things get missed in communicating. Like, okay, let's revisit. So, David, to your question, like there are moments where we will revisit the logistics of it. But once we restore connection, like I don't need to go chase her down to make sure she says she's sorry because how she felt when I hurt her, then she hurt me, and now we're like demanding each other is apologize. And we're like, actually, let's just find each other's hearts. Let's get back to that place. And if my empathy in that moment can get us there, then I want to use my empathy, because there are plenty of other moments her empathy gets us there. And over the course of time, this is the balance. It becomes imbalanced if it's only my empathy that ever gets us there, or it's only her empathy that ever, that's not going to work, because now you again have those who are held and those who hold. Not long-term sustainable. Does that make sense? I think, Jen, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what's difficult for me, though, is that phrase, I'm sorry,
Uh-huh.
feels like an acknowledgement that you did something wrong. And I think, and I can't speak for
Ah,
everything, but for me, that's something I would get stuck up on.
that's fair.
Well, I would apologize if I did something wrong, but I didn't do something wrong here. And so I think it's
Great.
shifting the I'm sorry to be less about you acknowledging you did something wrong, but as a statement of empathy, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. Without saying I'm sorry that you feel that way. That feels dismissive.
Okay, so a couple of things. One, language is language, and what works, works, and what doesn't work, doesn't work. And so if there are phrases that because of the culture we come from, the family we come from, are just barriers to us getting over. And so there are some, like, if I'm sorry is just, it's too complicated, we don't have to use that phrase, I'm sorry. What we do need to pay attention to is, while we don't need to take responsibility for the whole situation, if there is a moment where two of us engage and he experiences hurt, it doesn't matter if I intended it. I still played a part in his experience of pain. And so the empathy is being able to communicate, I'm sorry that I participated in such a way that hurt you. It doesn't mean I have to own intent. It doesn't mean I have to be responsible. Because the reality is, if we're engaging in a relationship in a way that causes you harm, and we're adults, chances are that's pain that existed long before me. I just happen to bump up on it. Right? If you carry a wound from your childhood because you felt abandoned or rejected, and we're out in a moment and I just turn my back on you and give you a side eye, and now you feel abandoned and rejected by me, I didn't initiate that wound that you carry. You've carried that way back when. But the reality is, I still poked it. The look that I gave you landed right on that spot, and I still poked it. So I don't need to apologize for the entire wound that you carry. But I can acknowledge that whether I wanted to or not, I poked it. And whether I wanted it to or not, my poke, which theoretically was gentle or benign, happened to land in a spot that was not gentle or benign and had a massive reaction that I had no idea existed. And this goes back to why, like, look at those pages on the pain, and go back and watch the video, because part of what happens is even us being able to be responsible, go like, I know you didn't intend to, but when you looked at me that way, I was thrown back to the way my dad used to look at me, or I was thrown back to the way the teachers used to look at me, or I was thrown back to my experiences of friends, and that hurts, and I don't need you to, like, commit to never, ever making that facial expression again, but I just need you, and this is like that honest to more honest, I just need you to, like, that hurt. That hurt, can we talk about it? And if we can engage in that way, in our bravery to say, hey, this is a thing that hurt, is meant by the bravery of the other person to go, oh, I can see that hurt you. I feel a way, I feel empathy towards you. And whether we say, I'm sorry that I hurt you, or I recognize that what I said hurt you, now we restore connection, now we can move forward and we dig deeper. No, I'm not saying this is easy, so please don't, right? And some of these questions are going, no, this actually is really complicated. Does that make sense? Okay. Yep. Uh-huh. Yep. Uh-huh. Yes. Yep. Yes. Oh, we can react in a myriad of different ways. And what we're highlighting is, in that moment, we just stayed disconnected. Right? And so the journey of brave relationship is to say, how do we actually move toward connection instead of just allowing disconnection to exist? Because a lot of times, that's actually a much simpler solution. Right? Whether it's with our partners at home, or whether that's with people in our church, or with people at work, to go like, ooh, I did not like that. Don't need to make a scene. I'll just back away from you. We don't need to be friends. Like, we can just go hang out at the same place. We don't need to talk. We don't need to go there. We'll just stay there. And I just don't think that's what Jesus had in mind when he said, let my people be one. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind when he said, this is my body. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind when he said, go be the light of the world, is to be a bunch of people who just learn how to tolerate disconnection. So justifiable, sure, we can do that. And actually, there's a reason we do it. Is way easier. Right? Not life-giving, doesn't restore, doesn't heal our woundedness, but a hell of a lot easier than whatever this messy, crazy thing is that we're talking about, being brave and practicing and taking risk. Like, oh no, there's a good reason most people don't do this. But if we could, if we would practice, if we would try, if we could get into honest and practice and move into more honest and be able to be brave and learn how to approach taking responsibility for ourselves, to approach with acknowledgement of the risk, if we could be brave to lean into empathy when we want to defend ourselves and run away, if we could be brave to sit in the space and honor the story of one another, if we can be brave to own our part when things break down, if we can be brave to walk into the messy work of repairing and restoring connection, if we could, if we would, wouldn't that church be amazing? Wouldn't the testimony of that people be the light of the world in a city, on a hill, in a community that participates in the restoration of what Jesus has for our world? And man, if we could do that, I'd really like to try. Exactly. Yes. Thank you. Yes. That's what we're after. Okay. Well, I know we're at 2:30. Can I pray real quick, or let you come up and pray, and then you can. Okay. Okay. You guys feeling okay? Feel a little weary? I feel like if we're not being a little weary, we're probably. Well, let me phrase that differently. When we work out muscles that we aren't used to working out, like weariness and strain, like that would be a pretty normal response. And so be gracious to yourself as you go. take wise risks. If you, I was like, if you can get with 2 or 3 people and just practice that quadrant, that would be the place.
That would be good.
But Jesus, I
Thank you,
pray for us, for me, for each of the men and women who are here. Jesus, may we be faithful to you. May we participate with you in the restoration of all things, of all relationships and all communities, God, in all life. May we grieve with you the fractured, broken places in our world. And would you continue to strengthen us through your Holy Spirit to be and to become people who can engage bravely in relationship. God, who can choose to take risks, to enter into the sacred heavy of others, to invite others to enter into our sacred heavy, and to work through it together to grow more and more into your likeness, Jesus. So I speak a blessing over each person here, that you would walk gently with them and that you would empower them to walk gently with one another. Jesus, I pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, let me just say a couple quick things. So he actually does have some of his material here, the slow journals and such. And so if you'd like to purchase those, that's great. Last year, Jay and Diane Van Reed did lead a care group, just like he described. It was very powerful. They're not doing it in this season, but that doesn't mean someone else couldn't start something like that. We can help you to get that going, or, as you very much encourage us, be the body and just do it. Okay. Connection precedes everything else. And that's what we're leaning into, to learn how to be the body. I mean, and this was the challenge, right? Joy and suffering. And to share with one another, we can be this people. And he gave us one main skill to practice those quadrants of just sharing, right? The joy, the sorrow, that kind of stuff, and hearing and empathizing. And I love the cycle of entering in, and what we ran into really, which this was, I mean, it's like prophetic, was like as he began to help us to understand how I'm broken and you're broken, and then it get ruptured, and I know it. It's in myself. It's in us. Well, that doesn't seem fair. Well, now wait a minute. I've had bad experiences with that. And so you poked us. But where you feel challenged, and I know I do, is the connection the most important? And then we can go from there. So I say, let's go there. Let's practice that as a church, married couples, etc., and let's help each other. And I'm thinking, well, we need some more help with the rupture part, right? But you can tell he's got so much. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say one thing about?
Oh, no, please come in, yeah.
Because I think the piece that I want to make really clear, like, because you're right, the question is connection the most important part? What I want to make sure is really clear is that does not mean we pretend away the pain and the things that we're carrying.
Yeah, thank you.
Right? We do not, because that will pull us right back into the spot. It just means that I can be honest, but also not put it on you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't have to put it on you in that moment, that I can choose to hold you whilst, and again, this is empathy and my own pain. They can coexist in that spot. Because otherwise we run the risk of going, I just need to pretend that you didn't hurt me. We're going to lean in and I'm going to hold you as if I'm not hurt at all. That's not what we're talking about. That's good. There are just moments where I say, my gift to you is I'm going to be empathetic towards you. And then I'm going to find a friend in Jesus or you, or we're going to talk about this later. But we need to not pretend away the moments that do hurt us.
Yeah, and thank you for clarifying. I don't want to take us in the wrong direction. And really all I'm saying is maybe that would be some of our next step. But so if some of you, all I'm getting at is if that came up, like, well, wait a minute, we got some conflict here. It is complicated, as he just brought up. Maybe that would be one of our next steps as a church and as married couples, as family members. Maybe we work on some of that and you help us. But let's not disregard, is all I'm saying, the thing we practiced. Let's practice the empathy, and then we will keep growing. And so that's all I want to say today is I want to embrace the fact that it is a lot. Like, we could have him speak for 3 days. He obviously has a lot to give us. And, of course, we know these truths are in the Word, too. So, yeah, let's just embrace that we've grown. we're going to practice, and then we're going to keep growing. Is that good? Okay, so.